what is currently in HB 2007. So they could comment also about those requests, but primarily we're going to be focusing on things that are in addition that are currently not as part of the budget bill. So with that being said, each of you should have a annual report. The State of Kansas 2024 Debt Study provides information from the Kansas Development Finance Authority, and they extended their regards, but we're not able to make our meeting today. So that is a report that you can look at to see all the information about the university's supported debt. We'll go ahead and start with a kind of an overview of what's currently in HB 2007 from our reviser, Jill Walters. So Jill, thank you for your work and going over everything in the budget, and I'll give the floor to you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the bonding authority for the universities in the bill are in section 141F. Emporia State is authorized to bond for the upgrade of all campus lighting, improve building energy efficiency, water conservation and HVAC at $10.2 million. And it is my understanding that that is an error in the bill. So I do apologize for that they had that last year. And so that's a technical that we can remove. Then I have to admit another error. In section 143F, KSU Strong Hall K-State had the ability to bond for Strong Hall. And it is my understanding that those bonds have been issued too. So those would be on a technical list that we will make for House appropriations. And the technical list really is just oversights and errors on in drafting it. And so we just didn't get our I's dotted and our T's crossed when we did that in December. And so those two are noted. I believe we've confirmed with the universities that those are errors, so, and shouldn't be in there. Then the bonds have been issued. Now, it's my understanding that K-State, in section 143G, that K-State, Pure Imagination Salina at $45 million, that those bonds have not been issued yet. And the language last year was for FY 25. And so we are putting that in for FY 26 for them to have the ability to do that. And that was my understanding on there. And then also in section 148F of the bill, KU Med has the ability to bond up to $100 million for the Cancer Center. And those are the university's bonding authority in House Bill 2007 currently.
Thank you, Jill. Are there any questions for the reviser about any of those that are in HB 2007? Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I see that Wichita State is going to testify today. Are they in a different spot?
So when we drafted House Bill 2007, that was not a request. So the LBC didn't, the Special Committee on Legislative Budget this interim in December did not have the opportunity to look at that. So it was not included, sir.
Okay, so are they, well, I guess we'll see if they're going to ask.
I think they'll.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Any questions from online? I didn't know if we had any members online, Chloe. Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Jill, for the overview, and we'll move on with our agenda. I'd like to welcome, starting off with Wichita State University, we'll have Andrew Schlapp, Vice President of Strategy and Government Relations. Andrew, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Andy Schlapp. You already said that. So from Wichita State, I want to talk a little bit about our bonding project. We were here last year and asked for bonding. There was two projects we had. If you guys remember the Build Back Better grant, we received a federal grant for $60 million. So we're building 170,000 square foot building that's going to be full of robotics and 3D printers for small and mid-size manufacturing companies in Kansas to be able to see what technology's out there and how to improve their manufacturing processes as we move over to this digital age. So that was funded and moving forward. We also had funding in there just under 12 million for University Stadium. That's currently Cessna Stadium. It hosts the state track meet, which is the largest state track meet in the country. We have 14,000 people come over a 2-day period, has an economic impact of about $7 million during that 2-day period. And it's a wonderful experience. Also, if you go back to the history, we want to make sure that that stadium stays around. That's where Jim Ryan broke the 4-minute mile in high school when he was at Wichita East. So there's a lot of history there. When we went out to do phase 1 and of the project, we had an estimation of $11.8 million for the project. When we went out for bid, the bids came in at 17 million. So we had to redo and refocus how we were going to do that. We ended up being 6.8 million over. So we needed to come back to you and ask for additional bonding so we can finish the project that's already under construction. Since that time, that money originally was being funded by the Board of Trustees and a local mill levy that we have. The Board of Trustees has given an additional $10 million. The city of Wichita has put in $6 million. Sedgwick County's put in $6 million, and USD 259 has put in $6 million. So it's another $28 million. So we're significantly on the way for phase 2. So while we were asking for a change to make sure we can finish phase 1, we thought we'd come at the same time and make sure we have the money there for phase 2. So we're asking for to be the opportunity to bond up to $60 million to complete the project. Be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? We'll go to Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Vice President Schlapp. So I know the state track meet has had a long tradition of being there. As I recall, it used to be 3 days and now it's down to 2.
Right.
What else? I saw the Rolling Stones there.
Correct.
But
Yeah,
they don't.
that was awesome.
They don't come around every year. It was awesome. They don't come around every year. So what else goes on there on a regular basis?
Sure. And so part of the issue becomes for us to host, and we're in the American Athletic Conference, you need to have a stadium that seats about 5,000 or 6,000 for NCAA tournaments and regionals. So we're building it at 14,000 so we can keep the state track meet. So it's larger than it would need to be to fit a lot of our needs. Having said that, what we're doing is it used to be our football stadium. So we're expanding the field. So we want to have soccer in the future. We have the ability to do that. There's also so much soccer going on in Kansas. Having a place for them to play makes sense. So we're going to expand that field so it can host soccer. And then we're going to add instead of an 8-lane track, it would be a 9-lane track. And then we reduce the seating that's currently there to about 14,000. But then in doing that, we've talked to the NCAA. They've asked us to put in a bid to host, typically the national track meets in Oregon. But after they hosted, I think for 3 or 5 years, they moved it to an off-site. Last year it was in Austin. It goes back to Oregon. They've asked us to put in for that as well. So we will do that. The partnership with USD 259 is to be able to host 2 or 3 football games there a week, soccer games there. And lots of different events for them, and having a place in the community where you can come together and host large events. Again, as you start thinking about junior track nationals and other things. So that's really the list we put together. The reason we got the city and county on board is they could start to see that we could double the economic impact if we could get 4 or 5 of those kind of major national or regional events at our track, and we believe that will happen. So we see a significant increase in economic development happening because of this.
Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a former life in radio, and although I've never been in it, I understand from my colleagues that the press box is in pretty sad shape.
Yeah, I was going to use a different word that started with S, but sad is a great. But yes, it's unair conditioned. The other problem is, right, you bring high school students there and you have bathrooms that were built in the 70s, and I won't get into that. Sad is a great word. Those are in sad shape as well.
But if you're going to bring these other events,
100%. That's part of the project. Phase 2 will be all of that. Updating the press box, all of that will be updated to today's standards, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, what about, are you, do you, or are you have plans to try to host a state football championship?
Yeah, we are in conversations with them. So during that weekend, we host softball, we host baseball and track that same weekend. So family members that have kids in multiple events can be in one place to do that. So yes, absolutely. Hosting football, we're in conversation about that. And we could do, again, depending on how they do that, we could do 2 of them during that weekend when they're doing that. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
yep.
Other questions from members of the committee? We'll go to Ranking Member Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Vice President Schlapp. With this-
No one has ever called me that. This is twice today. So this is awesome. So thank you. Oh, no.
With the city and the county participating, do you expect any of their recreation departments or anything?
That's all part of the conversation, sure. Yeah, I mean, right, is what we're trying to do is not build a university stadium. We want to have a community stadium. We're definitely going to use it for track. If we put in soccer, we'd use it for that. But there's so many opportunities to do other things. And really, the partnership with 259 is really the important one because they don't now, as they're going to a bond issue to update, they have an additional stadium that they can count as theirs. That they can then figure out what they else need to build. So it's a good partnership with them for sure.
Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how many events or how many weekends or whatever a year do you anticipate?
You know, we put together an economic development piece. We hosted the American Athletic Conference track meet last year. We did it the year before as well. Obviously, the state track meet. We're hoping, you know, if we can do 2 football games on Friday during the football season, right? So maybe that's an additional 10 games. Soccer matches, again, another 20. We can start now having a facility that we can host regional and national, whether it's junior or NCAA or community college events there. So I think we put together a pretty conservative list of an additional 12 to 20 events that we think we could host every year there because of this change. Yep.
Thank you for that question. I do have a question I'd like to ask the reviser. So on this legislative draft language that you have for Wichita State University, is the debt service SGF, or could you explain to the committee kind of how that would be paid for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. So when I get a draft like this, one of the things that I always check is how they're going to pay it. So if you would like go to the back of the bill, the third proviso up, debt service for any such bonds for such capital improvement projects shall be financed by appropriations from any appropriate special revenue fund or funds. So that's the peanut of it, is they are acknowledging they will not be asking for state general fund for this, that it'll be through their special revenue fund appropriations, and each university will determine how the bonds are paid through their revenue funds. I will tell you in the history, and I would have to look up, there has been, since I've been doing this since '06, I recall one instance where we allowed the universities to use state general fund money. And I just wished I could remember the project. I can't, but it is not common that we would ever say state general fund. We generally always say special revenue funds. And then,
You may proceed. Yep.
excuse me, I was just gonna say the other thing that we always look for is the final proviso that says they make provisions for the maintenance of the stadium and the related equipment and infrastructure. The legislature started adding that probably, I would have to look, but I would say 6 to 8 years ago, that the universities are acknowledging that, yes, they're doing this, but then they need to figure out how, or set aside money, to maintain what the legislature is authorizing them to build/renovate.
Thank you for that, Joel. I had another question. So special revenue fund, you know, so that wouldn't constitute, they couldn't use tuition. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that nothing in the language that we've ever drafted thus far would, I do not recall where we ever prevented that from happening.
Okay, thank you. And on the last part of the proviso language, it does talk about, this shall not constitute a debt of the state of Kansas within the Constitution and shall not pledge the full faith and credit of the taxing power of the state of Kansas. It says, and provided further, Wichita State University shall make provisions for the maintenance of the stadium and related equipment and infrastructure. So it's basically saying, it's kind of a nuanced way of saying something, but I'm not sure in layman's terms, I know what that means. So, if it's a property, it's owned by a state entity, but it's saying the bonds are not the obligation of the state, but the building could be. Is that correct?
The building is, yes, but the bonds are, the legislature, and I can't remember when KDFA was authorized, but basically the legislature established KDFA to be responsible for those things and looking at um, I don't know if I want to say the business side of it, but that's the financial aspect of it and seeing how that all works and then to issue the bonds. If I may, when we talk about, so the Constitution says that the state can't go into debt more than $1 million. And so we are reflecting in that this bonding doesn't constitute debt of the state of Kansas under there. And then there was discussion several years ago about whether by issuing bonds, whether we were pledging the full faith and credit or the taxing authority of the state. And really what this is a notification, in my mind, it's a notification to bondholders or bond counsel that the legislature is not in any way, shape, or form saying they would ever levy a tax to pay this back. That you're on, if I went out there and bought the bonds, if I'm a citizen and I went out there and bought the bonds, I'm on notice that I should be reading all the documentation about how this is going to get paid back. And I should know that the state as a taxing authority is not backing this.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate that. It's good to air that out so we have a full understanding of kind of that language, because we'll see that in other bonding authority requests as well. Is there any other questions for Wichita State? We'll go to Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the questions that the chairman asked were pretty much along the lines of what I was going to ask, just as far as if this could potentially cost the state any money. It sounded like it wouldn't from all the answers that were provided.
Vice President Schlapp, is there anybody from your CFO team here today?
Not today, no.
Okay, because I know it does say in your testimony, it talks about some metrics, and, that's probably above my head really to understand that, but in the sense of Wichita State University's fiscal position, could you share some more insight about the financial status? I mean,
Sure.
because I've asked some other institutions, do you have an operating deficit, or how much do you have in reserves? All of these things, and it's come up as well, questions about athletic departments. And so if you could go over that distinction at Wichita State.
Yeah, clearly, as we do this, we're going to look at this just like all the questions you're asking. We ask those same questions at the university. We can't over obligate the university as we go forward. So those ratios you see in there to show that we are comfortable with the debt that we are taking on. And again, what we have done is we had an additional gift from the Board of Trustees for $12 million. We have an additional gift from the Board of Trustees of 10, and then 18 million from the other local entities in our area. So you're looking at about 40-some million dollars that's already been obligated to this piece. And so we're talking about, again, up to another 20 million. Our goal, Zach was sitting in a meeting yesterday, we're trying to make sure that we're not spending up to 60, that we're reducing the size, and how do we be responsible in that. But we're very comfortable that we have the funds already to fund this. So we're not going to be looking at, again, coming to you and saying, boy, we didn't see this coming. And that's what those ratios are trying to show you, is that we have done our internal work and we're comfortable with what we're doing as well.
Thank you for that. And as it relates to the actual stadium, and it says in the bonding language that you shall make provisions for the maintenance of the stadium and related equipment and infrastructure. So how does the university absorb those additional costs moving forward and into the future?
Sure. So we already have those costs because we run a stadium now. And we're hopeful after we update it, the maintenance and the rust is not as profound as it is now. Tom knows that. Representative Sawyer understands that. So we don't see that being an issue, but that would be absorbed by the track teams. And then again, when we hold events, right? So USD 259 will not have to pay a rental fee to use that, but any type of maintenance or that goes along with those events, they would have a fee that they would pay. So we see that being covered by the athletic department, the people that are using it, and already in current budget for what we're doing to maintain the stadium today.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And so can you provide with the athletic department at Wichita State, is it considered a closely held affiliate of the university, similar to K-State University and University of Kansas? Okay, so the stadium would be Wichita State, not under athletics.
Correct. I mean, ultimately, the state of Kansas will own that facility, right? But it's paid for by other people, yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess kind of the elephant in the room, is there any discussion whatsoever about bringing NCAA football back to Wichita State?
Of course. Every time we talk about it, sure. You know, the issue was, I think it was in the 90s, early 2000s, we wanted to tear down the stadium. And it was actually the legislature that told us we couldn't because it was the Wichita delegation that was hopeful that we'd still have football. So in 2012, when President Bardo came to the university and he wanted football and he went out and said, we're going to do football, the one thing that was clear is that Cessna Stadium, built in the 60s and 70s, was not going to be adequate to host Division I football. So even if we had football, it wouldn't be there. And so what we've done is said, how can we renovate this to make this, I mean, right again, from a purely, when you drive to Wichita State, we've done a lot of great things. And I know Representative Sanders, you've been out to see a lot of what we've done. The first thing you see is a stadium that's falling down. And so what we want to make sure is that we right size it for the events that we need, that we maximize the events that we have, make it a facility that people, when they're driving up to the university, can be proud of their university. And more importantly, not get rid of the conversation about football, but with the understanding if we do football, then we're going to have to look at a different type of facility going forward.
So would it be possible to, I mean, 14,000 wouldn't be much for NCAA football. Would it be possible to expand the seating rather than build a whole new facility?
Sure. We'd come back to you for more money to request a study to do that at some future date, yeah. But yeah, that's a possibility. I would imagine most people would want it downtown by the water, but.
Any other questions for Vice President Schlapp? Representative Wagoner.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I just want to, again, just on the bonding authority, is this a totality of your bonding authority, or this is just your request for this year? This is just the new stuff, or does this, is this?
This is this year, yes.
For this year. And so what is the grand total of what Wichita State University has as far as outstanding bonds? I mean, roughly.
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't have that off the top of my head.
I think we could probably get with KFDA to get you the most accurate.
Last year we did, I think it was 60-some million for the Hammer building, then the 12 million for this. That would make it 72 plus the additional we're asking for this year. And there's probably some additional bonds that are still sitting out there. I think the John Bardo Center still has some bond life on it from when we did that back in 2015.
Representative Wagoner.
One more question. So what kind of interest rate do you guys pay for these bonds? I mean, what does it kind of run for public
I think
institutions?
The last one we did, like, I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 5%. And again, I don't totally remember, but it's somewhere in that range that we're planning on, yeah.
Okay, 20 years?
This would be a 20-year, yeah.
Any other questions for Wichita State? Yeah, there might be some more additional information in the KFDA's report from 2024 on Appendix A or the A1 or page A2 on that, or no, A1, sorry. Well, seeing no other questions for Wichita State, I think we can probably move on. But I do appreciate your taking the time to be here with us today and sharing with us this new bonding authority request.
Appreciate your time as well. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to welcome up to the podium Ethan Erickson, Vice President for Administration and Finance from Kansas State University. He was with us not too long ago, so welcome back to the committee.
Twice in 1 week. It's an honor. Thank you for let me talk briefly today about our request. This is additional bonding authority in relation to our Ag Innovation Initiative. I think President Linton has been here and talked a couple different times about that initiative. It really comprises 5 different facilities that we are either constructing or renovating, and that total project cost is around $210 million is our current project cost. I mentioned it's 5 different facilities, inclusive of a new animal science arena, which is a 3,000 seat capacity arena, as well as an agronomy research and innovation center that will support interdisciplinary agronomy and ag systems research. Our Global Center for Grain and Food Innovation, which will be a new interdisciplinary hub that enhances collaboration across food, animal, and grain sciences. And then lastly, many of you are probably familiar with these 2 facilities is Call and Weber Hall. Call Hall, if you think, is dairy, which is where we make our wonderful ice cream, and then we also have Weber, which is really more on the meat sciences side of the house. We're going to do some pretty extensive renovations to those existing facilities. I've also included in my testimony a current financing breakdown, a funding stack of how we're financing this project. First off, I just want to note the state has been incredibly supportive of this project, including several different buckets of ARPA funding, as well as additional state funds. And each of those buckets have either been required the university to contribute either a 3-to-1 match or potentially a 1-to-1 match. And then we've also been extremely successful with our philanthropic fundraising for this initiative. We've to date raised about $94 million. And we continue to aggressively seek support from our donors and industry partners. So we're constantly out there working to try to get additional donations. However, where I'm at today, for the university, it's our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we have funding available to complete the full $210 million of the project, and that's what the bonding request really is providing for us. Although we continue to seek those donations and that industry support, in the event that we come to a point where we are, in essence, having to pay our construction bills, we would potentially issue this debt in order to have that backstop available to us. We're not asking for any additional state support to service that debt. This would be the College of Agriculture's responsibility to find resources in order to fund that. But like I said, we really are pushing heavily and hard to complete our donor and industry partnerships and raise those additional funds ultimately for the construction of those and renovation of those facilities. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions now. I do have a couple other, I think, topics that have come up recently about some other bonding for the university.
Okay, thank you very much. Start off with questions then. Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I see that you have nearly $9 million in land sale listed. What, what land are you attempting to sell, and is it on the market now?
Nope, we already sold that. We sold that several years ago. It actually was land located across along Kimball Avenue, which our foundation actually purchased from us, and they are working to develop that particular area. So it's right across from the west parking lot of the football stadium. And so we sold roughly 16 acres to them for that 8.8 million. And then we have dedicated those resources back into and funding the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from members of the committee? If I may, in 2024, I believe, or I don't know if it was the 2024 legislature, I think, through SB 28, the K-State Strong Complex residential hall renovation project. So there was something in the governor's budget for that, and I can't remember if that's what Jill was talking about. So I don't know if
I don't believe it's related to the Strong Complex. I think it's the ks project, if I'm recollecting correctly on the governor's budget, which is actually one of the topics I kind of wanted to briefly touch on and maybe need to visit with Jill a little bit afterwards. Is that do you
may proceed. I was just trying to get some more information. Go ahead.
So the ks facility is a facility out at our Salina campus, and the legislature authorized bonding authority for that and also funding from the state to service that debt. As we've worked with the State Department of Administration, they have asked that they actually take over the management of that debt since it is funded through the state. And that debt is actually going to be issued by the state of Kansas rather than Kansas State University. So my understanding, what the governor originally recommended was simply a technical adjustment of moving the funding for that appropriation for that debt service from Kansas State University to the Department of Administration. So that debt is still planned to be issued yet this fiscal year. And all it was simply was a technical adjustment of really what section of the bill that funding was noted within. And I'm happy to visit with Jill and Brianna afterwards too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a moment. I'm going to call on the revisor for some additional comments regarding that.
Vice President,
You can call me whatever.
I just wanted to clarify that the Strong Hall Complex bonds have been
They
issued.
have been issued, yep.
Okay,
Mhm.
and the Pure Imagination, or I'm calling it Pure Imagination, you're calling it AIRS. It's
AIRS.
the same project for the KSU Salina campus. Those will be issued in 25.
That is my
And so,
understanding.
so we don't need the additional authority in 26. And then the debt service, you are, the Department of Administration is going to handle from special revenue funds. They are not,
No, so the plan was, and there was an appropriated line item to service the debt for the ks Pure Imagination facility. That was authorized in 25 and would continue obviously on beyond that. That was placed in our section of the bill. And what I believe the governor recommended, because now the state of Kansas is issuing that debt, recommended moving that appropriation line item out of our section and into Department of Administration section. So really it's a technical adjustment where the debt's being paid from. No other real changes are needed for that action.
Have a follow-up from Jill?
Yeah.
or
yes, sir, thank
revisor?
you. So, sir, just so I can understand it clearly, the Department of Administration will be paying it, the debt service from K-State Special Revenue Funds.
From the state general fund.
Jill, did you have any comment? Well, that's something that was on the governor's sheet, that we get a yellow sheet, and, you know, there's a lot of papers moving around here. So
Sure.
I haven't had extensive conversations with the governor's office about that. I'm willing to have those, but we're going to be working, currently, it's not in the budget bill. We haven't made any adjustments for who's going to be paying for that debt service. So that's something we need to reconcile before next week, so we can
Mr. Chairman,
have an understanding.
happy to work with Brianna and Jill too to make sure that we get this squared away.
Okay, thank you. Jill, did you have anything you needed to clarify on that, or are you okay?
No, I just think it's a point to note that if by switching it to Department of Administration, we're using state general funds, that is different than the special revenue funds that under the authority that was granted, it said special revenue funds. So that's just something the legislature needs to be made aware of.
So just a quick point of clarification, that the appropriation bill had a SGF line item to service that debt, and that was appropriated last year for that purpose. And so I'm not quite sure why the language only is referencing special revenue funds, but the intent was always to service that debt from the state general fund.
Well, we may have to look.
Yeah.
We'll look at that language again, just to make sure we're on the same page with that, because as I understand it, that would be somewhat of a change from the normal boilerplate language we would use, that would say special revenue funds. So
Sure.
we'll check on that and
Sure.
follow up. Vice Chair Sanders, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I'm have an answer to my question having listened to this conversation, but I was out on site on the campus late spring, early summer when you broke ground on the K-airs. I drove out there in the fall and no more dirt had moved besides the 10 shovelfuls that had turned the day of the groundbreaking. So is there anything actually happening out there at this point?
Oh, absolutely. And maybe probably what's been what you're not seeing is all the work in the background with all the design and engineering perspectives that are happening. I'm not quite sure if they have.
What about on the land?
Yeah, that one I'd have to go check on. I haven't seen that lately.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Other questions from members of the committee? So this current additional ask, aside from the things that are currently in the budget bill that may or may not need to be moved or clarified, so this is just a kind of a stopgap, what you're looking to do, so you can kind of move forward. Is that okay? All right. And in terms of K-State University's fiscal position, could you get some more information to our committee about, you know, do you have a reserve? You know, is there an operating deficit? Can you tell us about kind of the challenges that you face in administering what I like to say is almost like a municipality? You have a lot of things going on a large university campus, and a lot of revenue streams, a lot of commodities and different things that you have to oversee, so.
Yeah, appreciate that's actually a really good analogy. We have our own police force, we have our own power plant. I mean, it's a municipality is a good example. Maybe a simple way to look at it is the Board of Regents really looks at several fiscal factors when they look at our fiscal health as individual universities. In relation to the debt service, one of the key ones they look at is our debt burden ratio, which is really just the annual expenditures that we have for principal and interest in relation to our total operating expenditures. So for Kansas State University, we've been fairly conservative in our debt utilization at large. And so our current FY24 calculated debt burden ratio is 3.6. The board asks for us as institutions typically to stay below 7.5. And so we've got obviously quite a bit of a gap between there, and we feel very comfortable with this particular ask. In about every year, we pay off about 23 million in debt just through paying off our existing bonds that we have as an institution. And so really we're kind of staying even with this request that we have in front of us. So we feel like we're very healthy from that perspective. Obviously, always have challenges. There's always more needs than funding available, but we feel very confident that this debt would not create any undue burden.
Thank you for that. Is there any discussion? I think it was K-State Salina. So there was a new dormitory built within the last couple of years. But as I understand it, I think perhaps the foundation financed it. And then that's being repaid by the university through room and board fees or auxiliary payments back to the foundation, and that's how it's paid off. So is that unique, or is that something you do in other areas at the university?
That's fairly unique, and that one was due to expediency. It was quicker to be able to work and partner with through the foundation, and in essence, really, they just went out to a commercial market and got secured that debt. It wasn't necessarily based on their particular financials. It was really just meant to facilitate that transaction. The only other time that you might see the foundation coming into play from a debt perspective is, and like this might be a good example where we get pledges of donations, but oftentimes those pledges are on multiple years, sometimes 5 years out. And so it might come into play that we're in the midst of construction and we need cash, and then the foundation may take a loan on those pledges potentially so that that cash can be advanced in time to pay those construction bills. But typically, that's the extent of our partnership in that realm.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very insightful. I appreciate it. Any other questions for Kansas State University? Representative Wagoner.
No, thank you, Mr. Erickson. Very helpful. I'm just a little confused. You say you basically pay off $23 million annually on your overall debt. And then this page is basically $210 million of new debt. So I was getting the impression you said it was kind of a wash, but obviously it must not be. I mean, you're on the increase as far as your overall debt burden.
So just a clarification, 23 million is all that we're asking in debt, additional bonding authority. The rest we would be looking to finance of the 210 million construction project costs would be funded in some fashion, either, and I've got the funding breakdown in there, donations, industry sponsorships, and also the state has provided some additional funding towards this effort. But that when I mentioned that in totality, we have lots of different flavors of debt. So we have debt for our housing system, athletics, all those pieces together that come into play for our debt portfolio.
And if I may, Vice President, so there's a lot of different projects that are ongoing that aggregate into the $210 million. So the bond, is it targeted to a certain aspect of that or just the overall total?
Overall.
Okay. And so can you clarify again how those are going to be paid for, the bonds, and like what kind of timeline do you envision it being paid down over what time period?
So again, if fundraising stopped today, our current gap would be about $21.5 million. But fundraising is not going to stop. I just want to be clear. So then we would seek and issue the bonds. I think right now from a cash flow perspective, we're probably looking at issuing maybe this time next year. And then and that would help us from a cash flow perspective in order to continue to obviously pay our construction bills. So we would generate that 21 million. And then we're probably looking at a 20 to 25 year financing horizon for that debt if we issued that amount at that time.
Okay, so the 23.5 million would be over a 20+ year time.
Correct. Correct.
And how much do you have in cash right now in terms for this overall project? And how much is pledged? Could you?
So if you look on the chart that I have in my testimony there, Mr. Chairman, we've got total philanthropic of $92.5 million. And that's coming in a variety of ways. Some of it's pledged out over multiple years, some is cash immediately. So it's a variety of actions there. And then we've got 75 million in totality from different tranches from the state support for this initiative. And then we've got some, about 21 million either through the land sale proceeds that we generated at the institution. The College of Ag has also generated some one-time dollars that they are putting towards that commitment. And then the university has cobbled together a couple different internal resources also to fulfill part of that commitment. So we've got about 189 million identified to fund the project of the 210, and that's where we're coming back asking for that backstop. Again, philanthropic efforts, industry sponsors, we're still working on securing those. Our goal would be not to issue the debt. I just want to be clear. We would much rather prefer that we are able to fully fundraise for it.
So of the 92 million, how much is cash versus how much would be coming in over a period of time?
That I'd have to go back. And I mean, we've got, I don't want to hazard a guess, multiple donations. Some are immediate, some are over 5 years. But I'd have to get that information.
Okay, that would be helpful just from a educational standpoint, because I know some of those things are pledged, like you had mentioned, over 7 years, 10 years, things like that. So you have to cash flow the project. So ARPA, tell me about your deadline. So you're going to have to probably use that money on the front end. Is that correct?
Yep, and we've worked with the state in terms of how we're constructing our cash flow for the project. And so we have, I believe we've already spent that first no match. I think we're working on the state's SGF, but ultimately we're planning to have all of the ARPA funds spent, obviously well before the deadline. The whole project, the whole 210 million, is anticipated that we would be complete prior to July of 2026 is our anticipated timeline. And I think ARPA, you have to have all of that complete by that September.
Okay, thank you for that. And I did ask earlier about how much you have in reserve, but I can't remember if you answered that or I just forgot. You told me already, so.
Focused it more on the debt burden ratio and then that's really what the board holds us to, and when they're talking about our ability, and that's actually a component our rating agencies look at as well, is again, what's our overall financial health, and that burden ratio are those two pieces. I'd have to go back and get you our different reserves that we have.
Okay, so you said plural reserves. So I know there could be in different categories for different purposes, whether it's infrastructure or things that come up. I know some other universities had just given us a total number, in the event, you have some sort of infrastructure issue that's going to be very costly. So I would be interested in kind of what the university has set aside for that. And also you had mentioned the university cobbled together some money. So how does the university do that, and where do you get it from?
So in that particular instance, if you're familiar with the Educational Building Fund, those are dollars that come from the state that help us to maintain our facilities. And so I think that's generally about 17 million is what we receive, and it fluctuates depending on the property tax revenues that come in. And so we plan those dollars out for the various projects to support the infrastructure of the institution. And so what we've done is committed a portion of those dollars towards this effort. And it's completely appropriate, especially when you look at the renovation that we're going to do on Call and Weber. Again, using those educational building funds towards that support.
Okay, so maybe I just kind of perceived it differently.
Yeah, sorry.
This is existing stream of revenue.
Correct.
Through statute that goes to the various universities. Okay.
Correct.
Very good. Any other questions for Kansas State University? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who this question is for necessarily, but if we were to authorize a 23.5 million from the SGF, would that basically just mean that we would be increasing the 2026 budget by 23.5 million, and then over time, as they made payments, those payments would go into the SGF over a 25-year period?
Just clarification, Mr. Chairman, we're not asking state general fund support for this debt issuance. It would be existing resources that the college has. So no additional state funds being requested to service the debt.
It just seemed like earlier there was some confusion on that, because I thought you had said earlier that it was going to be coming out of the SGF. Was it? Because there can be some clarification on that.
Yeah, I'll let Joel Walters, our reviser, clarify that.
Yeah, so I am sorry, I need to stand corrected. The K-State Pure Imagination does have state general fund, and I missed that last year. So that is, I think, a little unusual. But, I mean, it's totally doable. It's nothing illegal, or the legislature didn't do anything wrong. I would just ask Ethan, for this, when you say within existing resources, do you mean special revenue?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And just to follow up on the Representative Fairchild, was your question answered, or do you have a follow-up on that?
So basically, we're saying that previously some of the bonding came from the SGF, but this 23.5 million would not be coming out of the SGF.
Two separate
President.
efforts, really. So Pure Imagination, the Salina, that's a totally separate project than what we've been discussing today. This is the Ag Innovation Initiative, 210 million, separate from that particular topic.
So the K-AIRS is currently, that is in the current budget bill currently, which received the LBC approval. And so this would be in addition to what's already been considered. So just as Wichita State was a new request, and I believe KU has one as well. So is there anything else from members of the committee? Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Erickson, I thought, you probably thought you were almost finished.
Yeah.
It's my
You're
turn.
going to be this hard on KU, right?
No, yeah, let's put that off. All right, look, I've done this for a while, but I am kind of curious. The last sentence of the, I guess, next to last paragraph, the College of Agriculture will be responsible for servicing the debt. Is that how we handle it at K-State? I mean, do all the colleges have to take care of their own bonding or services debt? Because that's news to me, and I'm just curious.
Not necessarily. I think in this instance, what we've been real clear is that the university, we've come up with our commitments, and this is going to greatly benefit that particular college. And so we've just been real clear that it's going to be the College of Ag that has to manage that. But not every issuance is like that.
Do they have their own development officer?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
so,
Yep.
okay.
Yep, they do.
Thank you.
So that's a great question, Representative. So it leads me to another question. Yeah, we'll get that spread across the journal. So when you specifically say College of Agriculture, and then I think the representative talked about development officers. Now we're talking foundation.
That is foundation. That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But the way the structure works is each college typically has one or two foundation development officers that go out and work with their donors to solicit support. And so I think that's what Representative Haskins was mentioning.
Okay, so those would be the special revenue funds that we're talking about.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Well, they're going to have their work cut out for them, I'm sure.
They do, that is
Big
correct.
project.
They've done a great job. I mean, it's a very short amount of time. Raising 92 million is not easy. Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I know there have been some other conversations under the dome recently about a asset that's on the university's property, but it's a state asset. You may remember there was a feasibility study authorized by the legislature last year for the veterinary diagnostic lab. And I believe this conversations in the legislative body have talked about various ways to potentially construct a new veterinary diagnostic laboratory for the state. And I believe that would be another avenue that I think there's potentially some debt service being discussed for that particular facility, along with some other financing mechanisms.
Yeah, thank you for, that's kind of a good reminder for me. Shouldn't overlook that because I know that is conversations going on in the legislature because many of us took a tour of the Animal Diagnostic Lab, which is a state asset, but it is under the budget of Kansas State University. So tell me about that. So if we were to this session find a pathway to get a project like that started and perhaps half or a certain percentage would have to be bonded. Tell me a little bit more about the Animal Diagnostic Laboratory. As I understand it, they actually turn a profit based off of the services they provide. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, I believe that is correct. I'd have to familiarize myself with the financials before I wade too deeply into that. But yes, there is a, I believe, a self-supporting generated revenue off of that.
Okay, so would a similar model be applied as for this project that we're talking about today, the 23.5 million that would be applied to that project, or would it be different?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not quite exactly sure what all the different conversations have been and sort of the discussions about where that debt would be serviced. But if we were to do that, we would obviously have to look at our rates that we're charging out for the various services that we provide in order to generate enough revenue to service that debt.
Okay, thank you. You had mentioned the debt service ratio, or I don't know if it's the debt burden ratio. So it was like 3.6, is that?
3.6, yep.
Okay, so I'd be curious, as we talk about these things, how much would that go up if we were to do an animal diagnostic lab? So just something to.
We'd have to go back and do some calculations, but we can certainly do that.
Okay, very good. Well, I think we've probably exhausted your time. We want to make sure to give University of Kansas plenty of time to answer all the questions we may have for them, but certainly appreciate you being here twice in a week and educating us on everything that you're doing at K-State.
Thank you. Happy to do so.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome up to the podium, University of Kansas, Jeff DeWitt, who's the Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer. So thank you and welcome to the committee.
Thank you for having me today. I'm going to try to address all the questions you asked my colleagues who went first so I can, hear the kind of questions you're asking. So I'll try to address that. We have been in a situation for the last 4 years, pulling down a structural deficit, growing our enrollment, doing a whole lot of things to get to the point where we can start addressing some of our capital facility needs. So you'll see when you look at our financial metrics, they have gotten significantly better in the last 3 to 4 years. And that has given us the ability now to start addressing some of our research, our academic, and also student housing. And one of the reasons why we've gotten in a better financial situation, we've had really strong growing enrollment. We graduated a 3,800 class last year. We brought in a 5,200 freshman class, and we brought in a 5,200 freshman class again. And we're kind of on that trajectory where we have the largest enrollment we've ever had. In the meantime, we've had housing that we have taken out because it's past its useful life. And so, when you look at that, you look at cancer research, you look at School of Architecture, those are the ones that make up our request. And when we're making these decisions about whether we're going to bond or borrow, we do a very comprehensive analysis. We look at what we've done historically, what we've paid off. We forecast 5 years plus into the future and say, what would this do to our debt burden going forward? That's the calculation you were talking to Mr. Erickson about a minute ago. And you'll see in my packet, you'll see a historical and projected debt service going forward in there. And so when we're making these decisions, let's take the Cancer Center first and we'll go to the other ones. We say, okay, what are our funding sources to fund a cancer center? This is a $500 million plus facility jointly with the health system. So it's a clinical and a research facility. And thank you very, very much for the $75 million the state provided last year that we have matched with donors. We've gotten some federal funding. But when you look at the total picture, what does it take to have the money in time to pay the contractors to build this building, which is a very expensive, very complex cancer research center and cancer clinical facility. And the bonds are one piece of that plan of finance. So when we're looking at that, we ask the question, what's our debt burden? how much can we afford to pay of our current resources to pay that debt? How much is going to be generated by research that's going to occur in this new facility to help service that debt, run the facility, operate it, et cetera? And in all that analysis, $100 million was the number that we can support, we can pay for. It's not going to put an undue burden on our debt capacity, and match that with the state funding, match that with the federal funding, match that with donor funding, and that plan of finance comes together to do that particular facility. On the housing side, as we're looking at all that, all the issues there, we are currently leasing nearly 1,000 housing units. We're leasing the Naismith building from the private sector. We have students in there. We're leasing 200 rooms in the HERE building. It's across from the stadium. We're leasing some property bought by endowment. And we're looking at the need to take down even more of our housing. Geoc Towers, if you happen to be familiar with the campus, two of those are already shut down. The other two maybe have 5 years of life left in them. And then you've got that pressure you're placing on the Lawrence community in terms of affordable housing. So I meet at least weekly right now with the city manager, and one of the topics is, affordable housing and how do we ensure that we can continue to grow but not put a burden on the city of Lawrence. So in that package, there's $100 million for cancer, and there's $100 million for doing some type of housing, and we're looking at one of our projects, which is a Gateway project you've probably heard about in the paper, has an apartment style complex that goes with it. There's also, so that would meet that demand. There's also demand of our students that we're recruiting and bringing in. They want the kind of residence hall style. So we're looking at building something to replace what was Oliver Hall several years ago. And that's what the 100 million would help us with, is that product that's affordable for the students we're recruiting, and somewhat apartments, somewhat residence halls. So it's figuring out what that mix is. And that $100 million would help us start addressing that issue as we figure out and build this housing to deal with affordable housing issues that are in the community, and to meet the demand to keep our enrollment where it is. We think we're topped out. We don't want to really grow anymore in terms of our campus community, but we want to keep at that level. And to do that, we're fully maxed out. If you have a roommate conflict, not to say 18-year-olds sometimes, don't get along when they first get assigned their housing place, but we don't have a lot of room to move people around given how full we are. So we need to address that going forward. And then the last one is the School of Architecture. We've had accreditation meetings, the last 3 accreditation meetings the School of Architecture's had. There's been comments, your facilities are not what you need to do in terms of all the kind of spaces the School of Architecture needs. And so that's actually a 3-phase project. And phase 1 is building a new building to move people in so you can renovate other buildings, and that's the $60 million request there. Now, when we were saying we're going to do $60 million of borrowing for architecture, $100 million for housing, and $100 million for the cancer center, we look at our current financial situation. We look at, do we have a source of revenue to pay that debt service when it comes online? And as was discussed before, we look at our debt burden ratio, which is really percent of debt as a percent of total expenditures. So 7% is the number we stay at. We've had the rating agencies come in as part of the regular oversight that they do of universities. We're a AA credit entity. We had, the chancellor and I met with Standard & Poor's on Tuesday. We met with Moody's just a week ago. And one of the criteria we have, and I think a lot of universities in Kansas have this, we are low debt burden relative to our peers. So when the credit rating agencies or the investors look at us, we are not over leveraged. We're leveraged less than other universities of a similar quality and a similar size. So that is a positive for us. It helps us sell the bonds in the market, and it gives us the capacity to do that. And if you look at the table that in the attachment 1 that I had, you'll see that we are, even doing all these projects, 260 million, we are still below what we were in 2020 in terms of debt burden. So we paid down our debt. We've planned well, our financial recovery is strong, and that gives us the ability to do these types of projects, which are critical to student success, having housing to continue our enrollment, HLC accreditation for our School of Architecture, and it's kind of hard to argue about, a cancer research center and the value that will have to our residents and our community and to the university. So it's research, academic, and student housing are those. And then the last one in there is just a request from the legislature to do a refinancing or refunding of bonds we issued in 2016 for the Central District. So it's the ability to refinance that for savings. which then reduces your debt burden, which gives you ability to pay and things like that. So those together is what's in our request for a bonding authority, is to refund some debt from, and by the way, the last time we issued debt was 2016. So the reason why our debt burden has dropped, and the reason why we're able to do what we've done, is we've been very prudent about issuing any more bonds while we get through our recovery, while we pay down some debt. But now it's the point we need to invest to keep moving forward and to do the things we want to do in research, academic, and student housing. So that is kind of a summary of that. And in the packet is a description of each of the projects in detail. Funding source, student housing would be paid by student housing fees whenever they come into that would pay the debt service and operating. The research growth is going to occur on the Cancer Center is going to fund that, and School of Architecture, they have funding sources available that we've looked to make sure that debt service can be paid. So this is going to put no additional excessive burden on the university. We'll still stay financially strong, and we have the capacity to do it and stay even still below our peers, AA peers, in terms of leveraging and debt burdens and things like that. And on the reserve side, question I know you've asked some of the others, we do have reserve policies we put in place back in about 3 or 4 years ago. I've been with the university for 4 years now. We have policies about how many days of cash we have, a contingency fund for our general fund. We have policies for our housing and for our dining and for other facilities to make sure that we have even policies on our research. So if there's a 60-day government shutdown, we could get through that. So all those together make us where we're resilient and able to get through the challenges we have. And whenever the rating agencies come in, they look at how many days cash do you have and how do you operate that. We give them those reserve policies, and that's part of our AA credit rating.
Are you able to stand for questions from
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll go to Ranking Member Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chancellor. Welcome to the State House today. Thanks for coming. Going back to the student housing request as part of this, can you go over that again? That includes the Jayhawk Towers
Well, so
and the Oliver Hall property?
Well, the reason why we need to build new facilities, because Oliver Hall was tore down a couple of years ago. Jayhawk Towers, there's 4 of them. The 2 middle ones have been off for a year and a half now. The other 2 are toward the end of their useful life. So we're probably going to be taking those down in the future. So it takes 2 to 3 years to build housing. So we need to get started on that process so that we can, when we bring those down, we're not causing an additional burden. And the product that we need has changed post-COVID versus pre-COVID in terms of what students demand and ask for. So the Gateway project that's out there is one piece of the housing solution. This $100 million would be the other piece, so that we can make sure we can house the students and get people to come here, that they know they'll have housing whenever they enroll at the University of Kansas.
Thank you. And would this eliminate the need for the apartments that you all are renting right now?
Yes, it would allow us to get those back into the markets, because we're causing housing challenges by, we're taking it out of the market where they were being used before. So yes, it would help us not have to lease those anymore as well, or at least reduce it.
The committee, that is a true statement. I mean, it really is. You take the number of units that they have out, it has a real effect on the market and the availability of housing. And, you know, while the city of Lawrence and Douglas County even talking about affordable housing throughout, I mean, it's hard to do when our big driver is taking up part of that housing complex.
And the city manager and I talk about that weekly now, because it's something we know we need to address. And I've talked to him about us requesting this to help address that for the university and the community.
Yeah. Thanks, sir.
Thank you for the questions and conversation there. And go to Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I recall our conversation a year ago, the Cancer Center, part of the need for this is because the research is in 19 buildings altogether. So when that all comes together under the one roof of the new building, wouldn't that create the possibility of some of those existing buildings being repurposed for student housing?
Well, there's really, that would be at the medical center, so there's not really a student housing demand at the medical center. But going to your point, it opens up space to do other things and to save money and to get resources together. If you were to talk to Dr. Jensen, Dr. Roy Jensen, he would tell you of all the benefits of bringing one of that under one roof and then putting it next to the clinical side of cancer with the health system. But that will free up space on the campus and help us repurpose it to optimize our expenses and costs at the medical center in Kansas City.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
So while we're on the topic of the Cancer Center bonding authority request for the 100 million, and I haven't read the language yet. I haven't seen the draft language for that one yet, but well, it's in the bill, but I haven't studied it, I should say. It touches on the hospital authority and then also the KU Medical Center. Can you describe to me kind of the dynamics there and how you had mentioned future revenue growth due to research, so that's anticipated. I don't know if that's similar to if you build it, they will come, field the dreams type stuff, but you're confident that there's going to be research taking place and revenues are going to be generated. But tell me a little bit more about the relationship between the hospital authority and the cancer center, and also how those the debt service will take place.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's this is roughly a 220,000 square foot research building, and then there's going to be a roughly equivalent side clinical building. So if I'm a patient and I go in on a trial, I might be in the research side, but I might get treated on the clinical side. So the synergies of that are kind of mind blowing when you think about the ability to do research and treat and cure cancer all at the same time. And so the part that's a clinical, the health system is taking that on themselves. They're doing their own fundraising, they're doing their own financing, they're doing their own operational funding of that. And then the medical center is doing the research piece of it, which is our piece. And the critical piece of that is the $75 million from the legislature last year, the matching from donors, some federal money, and then this $100 million of borrowing that will be there. And I think it's, you know, this, we kind of really, this is sort of model how we probably all should be doing this. We did a 50-year look at this cancer center to say, okay, let's look at because cancer research facilities are very complicated. So what's the useful life of that equipment? How long is that building going to need to be done? How much grant money do you need to generate? What kind of startup packages do you need for researchers to do that? And let's look at it not on let's build it and hope it stays there. It's looking at it, building it, and making sure it can be run for 50 years. So we have a very complex look at that and played out different scenarios to make sure, going to your point, you don't want to build it and they'll come and they don't come. The revenue that will be generated by this facility, given what it's going to be doing, and pretty certain because we're already wildly successful in cancer research in many, many places by bringing it together, all the things that happen, we're very, very comfortable that debt. Now, if they wanted to borrow $300 million, I would tell them no, because that's getting to be too much risk. But you want to borrow $100 million, that's easily covered by these factors. So when you're deciding to do debt, you have to say how much can you comfortably afford so you don't put yourself at risk. And 100 million is that number that we don't want to go above. And we can easily cover through that 50-year analysis that we've done for the Cancer Center.
This isn't probably a fair question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. Let's say another institution comes up with a cure for cancer. So what do you do with the Cancer Center?
I would love there to be a cure for cancer, and I would think that would probably be worth that. There's so many different types of cancer. There's so many challenges that this is a long journey and a long slog that's been going on for a while. And if you figure out how to cure cancer, then let's figure out how to cure Alzheimer's, and let's figure out how to do that. There's no difficulty if somebody magically did that to pivot to take care of other human afflictions that we have. So yeah, I'm not worried that we could not pivot in that building if somebody magically came up for a cure. But there's so many different kinds of cancer, unfortunately. That would be great. I would love that. So would all of us.
I would too, and many of us would as well. It was a very unfair question to the chief financial officer. But you did answer that very well. We'll go to Representative Haskins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the testimony. And again, just kind of fascinated about this whole world of bonding. But my calculations is that you have new bonds is 260 million. And then you want the ability, or you do plan on refinancing the 275.2 million?
We plan on it, assuming the market, because we cannot, we issued those in 2016. They're able to be refinanced a little less from a year from now, so we need authority today to get that started. If we were to refinance it today, we would reduce our debt service by 7%. So it's a big savings, and we kind of target at least 3% before you do it. This has got a 7% saving, but what will the market be 11 months from now?
Well, and that's
better.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing, because you did have kind of a definitive you will do so. And I was just wondering, like, what am I missing? Because if the market's bad, why are we?
We will, pending the market, yeah.
And yeah, there's an asterisk now.
Yeah.
I got an asterisk right here. Okay, gotcha. The last thing is, I'm all for student residence hall, students living on campus, far more successful. It's the elasticity of the leasing that you have that I find fascinating, because sometimes enrollment's going to be up, sometimes enrollment's going to be down, and it seems like there's a great partnership opportunity with the city manager, with the municipalities, and it's so. Talk to me about that. I guess, as far as, like you said, you have a conversation with the city manager weekly and about the housing, and I get it, but it seems like, and you do plan to purchase an existing leased apartment complex. And so talk to me about that.
So the housing is complicated, for lack of a better way of saying it. We have, a different mix. We have scholar halls, we have, the typical residence halls, we have apartments. And we've done a pretty extensive multi-year financial plan for the housing. So what if enrollment drops off? What are you going to do? What if this happens? So you can cover all scenarios. We do not have a freshman requirement like many universities do on our campus, yet we're full. And we don't have room, and only 70 to 80% of people who are freshmen live on campus. So 20% live in the community, or they commute, or whatever the situation is. So when we're looking at what our housing options are, we're doing an analysis of what product do we need, what can they afford? Because I can build something that no one can afford, and then I got a white elephant sitting there, so to speak. So we've looked at affordability. We looked at the kind of housing that our students are asking for. If you were to go back 5 years ago, no one wanted Stouffer Hall, which is our hiring departments. No one wanted to live there. Now that's the first one that sells out. We don't have enough of that product. It's a post-COVID, pre-COVID kind of what kind of place you want to live in. So in looking at all the markets and all those types of things, about 1,000 units is what we need to build of different types of mix to take down the leases so they get back into the community. And then if there is a downturn, if we drop back into the 4,000 because of the quote enrollment cliff, we still have the ability to fill that up by demanding more freshmen stay on campus, or offering it to sophomores who don't have to live in the community. The other thing you've seen KU do is we've grown the out-of-state enrollment quite a bit in the last 3 years. And out-of-state students want to stay in residence halls longer. They're more likely to want to be there their sophomore and junior year than a freshman that lives in Kansas does. So all those factors we've looked at, analyzed, scenario planned, and come to the conclusion that this is about 1,000 units of this mix is what we need to build. And the 100 million gives us that optionality to figure out how to do that. Do we buy it? Somebody else build it and we buy it? Do we build it? All those factors just gives us the ability to pivot in all those different directions.
I appreciate that explanation. And the reason I ask is because I kind of circling back to Wichita State and their stadium, and how the reference was that this was going to be a community stadium and track. And I just felt like, well, here's another good opportunity in which municipalities and KU, state and local, can get together, because there would be an economic impact. So thank you for that. And then also, if you could just notify me if and when, the building that you mentioned gets torn down? What was it, Jayhawk Tower?
So the Jayhawk Towers, the two middle ones,
Yeah.
they're on the demolition list now, and we have them scheduled, I think, 2 years from now.
All right, I'll need a moment of silence.
Did you
If
stay
there's-
in those with you?
No, there's a lot of good memories that I
Okay.
can't say on the record, but
Okay.
it
We
hit
will
me.
let you know when those.
I mean, you didn't tell me about Oliver Hall, and that was sad to
Sorry.
see, so that's all right. That's all right.
We'll go ahead and spread the words across the journal. For posterity's sake. No, thank you for that. So the student housing, that's a very interesting topic in general. And I think it's a broader discussion, but I was wondering, do you have that discussion with, your colleagues in other universities, about privatizing housing? For instance, I know years ago, the Department of Defense privatized, Department of Army started privatizing housing on post, military posts, Fort Riley included, and to save essentially, taxpayer money. And so, and deferred maintenance cost and all those things. So is there a conversation about things of that nature? Or do you have any comment?
That's a great question. And the reason why we're looking at housing on the Gateway site is the developer is proposing to provide that housing and we partner with them. So that's a classic public-private partnership kind of thing. And, if you were to ask us 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would we consider that? The answer would probably be no. But today, you have to consider all options, going back to your point, is we're open to this $100 million authority gives us the ability to say, do we want to partner with the private sector to build this and then we certify housing with them? Do we want to have them build it and we buy it? Do we master lease it? Do we build it ourselves? All those are on the table is what's the most optimal way with the most flexibility to pivot in this world of changing higher ed. And we're going to do what's in the best interest of our student experience and what's in the best interest of our financial situation, going to your very point. The reason why the military just looked at that years ago, all those options have to be considered to figure out how to get through all the challenges that we have. And every one of you mentioned, we have ran a scenario and looked at, and we're open to all those options as we figure this out.
Thank you for that. And so I just want to be clear, is any of this student housing going to be on property that would be subject to property tax? The apartment?
It could be. So the Hawker site that is just north of the stadium that the endowment purchased, that we are leasing from them, from endowment, that is subject to property taxes. It's on private property. If we decide to build on the old Oliver site, which you're familiar with, that would not be because it's on university property, but we're open to what is the best. These are discussions we're having with the city. Where's the best place to do this? Obviously, if you don't have to pay property tax because it's on there, that makes the housing more affordable. But you might get a better deal if you do it with the private sector, and maybe it offsets it. So we're open to all that. There's options where it would be, and there's options where it wouldn't be.
Okay, so just to be clear on the housing, the request for bonding authority, so you don't have the plan finalized, is that correct?
We know we need funding to start doing the planning. So this is to give us the authority to issue something as soon as we figure out the answer to the question you just asked, is how are we going to do this? So this is not for a specific project. It's for something to build 1,000 units, to get 1,000 units. And so
Okay.
this gives us the ability to do that. Without this, we don't have any way to move forward. In terms of, a solution, we don't have any other funding source to do that.
Okay, and I didn't have the opportunity to fully examine the written testimony, but what has been dedicated in philanthropy or other sources for the housing specifically?
Nothing yet. So this is in the early, we now know we can hold our enrollment, and we have this enrollment. We know we're having a challenge. Let's find a solution to address the housing unit. And this gives us the ability to have a tool in our toolbox to figure that out. And we'll look at, fundraising is really hard on student housing. I mean, maybe you can get alumni to rebuild Jayhawk Towers or something, I don't know. But this is the beginning of that exploration, and we're looking for this tool, which would be able to do bond funding of this so we can optimize a solution. And we need to move fast. We need to probably in the next 6 months lay this plan out because it takes 2 to 3 years to build.
So, I mean, you know, I guess that's moving fast by some people's standards, but it's probably not fast enough for the
It's not.
current need. But you'd mentioned the growth in the freshman classes. So it's a 5,200, I'm not sure if that's the right number, but approximately for several consecutive years. But how many of those are students on campus?
About 80%, a little less than 80% live on campus. So we have the capacity to do a little over 5,000, but that's some returning sophomores and the freshmen, and we're 98% plus full. And so that, it's about 80% of our freshmen currently, and we don't have a requirement, it could be 100. But some live in the Greek system, some, live in the Lawrence and happen to live with their parents and go there or live in neighboring communities. But it's about 78% of freshmen live on campus.
Okay, thank you for that. And so the remaining percent isn't anything online, or is it some online?
The 5,200 is in person on campus. That's the number that are on campus, so to speak.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, did you have any parting comments or anything you'd like to share?
Thank you for consideration of this. And again, the Cancer Center, I think, is in the budget bill. The other two are not. And so we really would like to move forward with School of Architecture and figuring out a housing solution. And this would be very helpful in that. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. DeWitt. And I want to thank again all the people that took the time to be here from Wichita State University, K-State University, and the University of Kansas. I think it's been a good, informative discussion about the challenges before many of our institutions, those that are under growing pains, if you will, and all the dynamics at play. I will make mention that 2 bills have been referred to our committee. The first one is HB 2195. This is a bill that I helped request bill introduction on behalf of the Kansas Technical College Association. And the next one was introduced by Representative Turner on behalf of the Kansas Hospital Association. That's HB 2248 to establish a Kansas Nursing Initiative grant program. So I'm not sure kind of what our timeline looks like. I'll get with staff to see if it's possible to do a hearing next week on some of those, but primarily our focus is on the budget. Does anybody have any questions about the week ahead or what appropriations is doing? What are we doing tomorrow? That's a good question. I want to go to Brianna Horton first. She had an announcement.
Committee, I just wanted to let you guys know that I did send the budget committee reports for Pitt State and Fort Hays State, so those are in your email inbox, and you can just review them, and if you have any changes you want me to make, just let me know.
Thank you very much for your work on that, and that will have the notation as well. Okay, very good. So I will report those budgets out tomorrow, hopefully. I'll be going back to appropriations at 5 p.m. tonight because we're getting a little bit behind. And we'll try to play catch up. So if you guys have any questions in the meantime, you know where to find me. My door is open. If not, it's because Eli locked it. But nonetheless, I appreciate your time today, and the meeting is adjourned.